Everyone, this is Catherine Batar. I'm the Associate Program Officer for the Talent Dividend, and I'm happy to welcome you all on behalf of CEOs for Cities and the Talent Dividend. I'd like to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Joe Courtwright, who is the President and Principal Economist for Impressa, a Portland consulting firm specializing in regional economic analysis, innovation, and industry clusters. He is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute and the Senior Policy Advisor for CEOs for Cities. Most specifically and most relevantly, Joe is the primary data specialist for the Talent Dividend. Thus, he'll be speaking on the second year progress report and the data for the Talent Dividend Prize competition. So, Joe, without further ado, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Catherine. Good morning. And I'd like to, it's morning here on the West Coast where I am. Good afternoon to the rest of you in the Eastern time zone. I'm happy to be here today to talk about the most recent work that we've been doing on the Talent Dividend and bring you up to date on that. And what I'll be talking about today are what we're calling the Year 2 reports for the Talent Dividend. We've sent out information to all of the participating cities. So everyone who is involved in the Talent Dividend should have received or should have available to you a Year 2 report that describes the progress in your metropolitan area through the second year of the Talent Dividend Prize. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So let me just quickly give you a roadmap to the presentation that I'll be making here. And try to advance the slide. My keyboard is just a little bit sticky. There we go. So I'll be talking about three things, so we're covering three subjects. I'll be talking about the Talent Dividend itself, and just doing a quick refresher on the background behind the Talent Dividend, why we're approaching it, and give you some updated information that may be of use to you in your communities in talking about the Talent Dividend and how it works. And then we'll go on to the meat of the presentation, which will be a review of the Year 2 reports and some discussion about how we'll be making use of those reports and how these Year 2 reports are essentially a dress rehearsal for Year 3. And Year 3 is the final year of Talent Dividend and will be the basis on which we award the Talent Dividend Prize. And then, as Catherine alluded to, we'll have some time to answer your questions at the close of the presentation. So as we move on, let me talk first about the Talent Dividend and the rationale behind it and the evidence for it, and give you some of the new information that we've gathered in the past couple of months. You probably all recall the key argument behind the Talent Dividend, which is that we know that there's a very strong connection between the level of educational attainment of an area, a metropolitan area or city, and the performance of its economy. And that relationship leads us to believe that if we're able to increase the 4-year college attainment rate significantly, by say 1 full percentage point in the city, we would expect there to be an associated increase in the per capita income of that city based on the cross-sectional relationship that we observe among cities in the United States. And the relationship is such that if we were able to increase the college attainment rate in every one of the top 50 metropolitan areas by 1 full percentage point, we would expect per capita income for the nation as a whole to increase by something on the order of $124 billion per year. So we know there's a significant economic return, both locally and nationally, to improving our level of educational attainment. And the evidence that we have for that comes from a couple of sources. One of the things that we know is that for individuals, there's an increasingly strong relationship between the amount of education that an individual has and their long-term economic success as measured by annual earnings or average income. And if we look back in history, and this data, the charts that you're seeing now, shows for 1975, it's always been the case that folks with more education have realized higher annual earnings. But that stair-step relationship between education and income has grown progressively stronger over time. So that while it looked like that in 1975, By 2011, that staircase relationship had grown even steeper. And I should note that the charts that I'm showing you here are showing the data in inflation-adjusted dollars. We've stated everything in 2012 dollars, so roughly speaking current dollars. So just to go back and forth between these two slides, just to give you some idea of how that relationship has changed. I hope this is showing up on the webinar. You can see how basically all of the gains in income have been concentrated among folks who have a bachelor's degree or higher level of income. So we know that there's, at the individual level, this very, very strong relationship between educational attainment and economic success. And what is true for individuals is also true for regions, for states, for metropolitan areas. And I'll give you one more chart here on this college wage premium. This is basically, we know that relative to folks with a high school degree, that wage premium has been steadily increasing over time. There's a little bit of variation year to year, but the trend has been upward. It was the case in 1977. The average person with a four-year degree made about 40% more than the average person with a high school diploma. Today, it's more than 80% more. And the premium for the folks with some post-secondary education has increased from about 10% to 20% over what somebody with just a high school diploma has earned. You know, we have, while we're proud of the research that we've done with the talent dividend, we know that the results and the relationship that we're reporting here are based on a wide variety of research that's been done. We are, in essence, standing on the shoulders of giants here. Just to give you a couple of examples, a book that came out last year from Enrico Moretti, who's at the University of California, Berkeley, really confirmed the essence of the relationship we report in the talent dividend. That human capital, that is education, is the best predictor of high salaries for both individuals and communities, and I'll give you a little bit more evidence on that in a second. And that he concludes that the presence of college-educated residents benefits not just those people who have the higher education, but benefits all the residents of the metropolitan area as well. So this is one of the important takeaways we think of the dividend is that higher levels of educational attainment are a benefit not just for the people who get those educations, but for the other residents of the metropolitan area as well. Similarly, we know from work by the Harvard economist Ed Glaser is that there's a similar spillover benefit as it relates to unemployment. That is, unemployment rates for everybody, regardless of their education level, are lower in places where the population is better educated, where you have a higher fraction of people with a four-year degree or higher. And I appreciate that this is a bit of a complex chart, but that's the evidence that Glaser looked at and shows that unemployment rates are in fact lower for people at all education levels when they live in metropolitan areas that have high levels of educational attainment. So part of the takeaway for us with the talent dividend is we want to increase educational attainment both to benefit folks who get the education, but then also because it raises incomes and lowers unemployment rates in those metropolitan areas that manage to improve their level of educational attainment. So based on that evidence, we think there's strong support for our two key hypotheses, that better educated metropolitan areas have higher incomes and they are more productive because those better skilled workers have higher levels of output, are more innovative, and so on. And we see that when we look at the data for metropolitan areas. This is the analysis we did prior to publishing the talent dividend 3 years ago. And we looked for the 50 largest metropolitan areas, the relationship between the fraction of the adult population with a four-year degree, and this is 2006 data, and annual per capita income in the previous year. Each of those observations you see abbreviated there represents one of the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And that equation basically tells you that we can explain about 60% of the variation in per capita income among metropolitan areas by knowing what fraction of the adult population has completed a 4-year degree. And that there's this very strong positive relationship, and that every 1 percentage point increase in per capita income was associated, or every 1 percentage point increase in the 4-year college attainment rate was associated with about a $760 increase in per capita income. Recently, we've re-estimated that same equation based on more current data, and we find that the relationship is very, very similar and somewhat, in fact, somewhat stronger. Again, about 60% of the variation is explained by just that one variable. And now the increase in per capita income associated with a 1 percentage point increase in college attainment rate is about $850, $860 for each 1 percentage point increase. So again, we're very confident of the nature of this relationship, and that's what underpins the talent dividend. So we've changed this slide a bit based on that research. Every 1 percentage point increase is associated with about that $856 increase. And the other thing that I always would like to remind people of is that while we use this figure, the 4-year college attainment rate, as our single summary statistic, a way of benchmarking progress, we know that the gains actually come from making improvements at every step of the educational spectrum. So the gains come not just from moving people from having completed, say, 3.5 years of college to getting that BA degree, but come from reducing the number of high school dropouts, increasing the number of people who go on to post-secondary education, increasing the number of people who complete an AA degree, increasing the number of people who get BA degrees, and increasing the number of people who get a postgraduate degree. So it's shifting the entire distribution of educational attainment a little bit to the right is what produces the gain. And when you think about the talent dividend, think about improving the educational attainment at every step along that educational continuum, because we know that's, in reality, what's producing these big economic gains. It's not just the product of moving a few people past that BA degree finish line. And we've illustrated that graphically in this graph here. We expect to make improvements all across that education. So with that, and just as a refresher on the talent dividend, our thinking behind it, how it works, and the evidence, let me now move on to discuss the Year 2 report.
And Joe, actually, just to interrupt really quickly,
Sure.
Would you mind
Yes.
speaking a little bit louder? We're having just a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Is that a little bit better, Catherine? Let me just do a mic check and make sure that you can hear me okay.
Yep, that's a bit better. So yeah, just as close to the mic as possible. Thanks so much.
Okay, will do. I'll try and belt it out for you now. So the Talent Dividend Prize, as you all know, just to summarize, is we're going to provide a $1 million prize to the metropolitan area of the 57 who are registered to compete in the contest. And that prize will go to the city, actually the metropolitan area, that generates the biggest increase in the number of post-secondary degrees awarded on a population-adjusted basis over a 4-year period. And the 4 years are the base year to year 3, which is next year. And we'll talk a little bit now about how we do that calculation and show you the data that we're using to compute the Talent Dividend Prize. So next slide, the calculation details. We're relying on data from something called IPEDS, which hopefully you're all familiar with, but is the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, which is run by the U.S. Department of Education, and gives us a very detailed census of the total number of degrees that are awarded by institutions of higher education in the United States. So we're relying on that database. And then we're getting population data from the Census Bureau and its American Community Survey. In the prize rules, we established a very clear system for weighting degrees, the relative importance of them, which we think is roughly proportional to their economic contribution. We're weighting every 2-year degree 1 point, and weighting every 4-year and advanced degree 2 points. The base year for our calculation is the 2009-2010 academic year, And what I'll be showing you is data through the 2011 and 2012 academic year, which is what we're calling year 2. The final year will be next year, or the following year, the 2012-2013 academic year. And for those of you who want to read in more detail the explanation behind this and have something to refer to, you can visit the website and see the rules for the talent dividend at the address that is shown there. So, briefly to summarize, the scoring is AA degrees at 1 point, and all those bachelor and advanced degrees are calculated at the 2-point level. That should be pretty straightforward. And we use the base year of 2009, 2010, and we've actually, now provided cities with what we call the baseline data. That was a year and a half ago. About a year ago, we provided everybody with year 1 reports, and in the last few weeks, we've shipped out what we're calling provisional year 2 reports. So everybody has a report that shows what has happened with the educational institutions in their community. And we're calling them provisional because we want to give everybody a chance to look at the data that is in IPEDS for their metropolitan area and for their institutions, and have an opportunity to look at them and alert us to any problems or deficiencies in those reports. We know that IPEDS is overwhelmingly very accurate, but occasionally there are errors that creep into that process. And before we make any determinations, we want to give everybody a chance to look at that data and correct any problems that either you identify or that we identify. And I'll be talking about that process. And that's strictly voluntary this year, but when we make the determination of the prize next year, we'll definitely need people's cooperation to validate the numbers that are coming from IPEDS, so that when we award the prize, we'll be doing it based on accurate and validated information. So the year 2 report basically will show you data for the base year, the 2009-2010 year, and compare that with the 2011-2012 years. And we've actually given each participating city 2 separate reports. One is a detailed report that shows for each institution of higher education in the IPEDS database what the number of degrees were that were issued in each of the 2 academic years that we're talking about. And then we have a summary report that shows you what the totals are for your metropolitan area, and then computes the score. And the score includes both the number of degrees, but then also includes this adjustment for population growth. And we show the population figures that we have taken from census. And again, I want to add that we've taken the data from IPEDS, and if we identify problems with the data that's in IPEDS, we can make adjustments. So again, treat these as preliminary or provisional numbers at this point. So to give you an example, here's what a second-year report looks like. These are typical the reports that we sent out. This is the summary report. You can see this is for the Buffalo Niagara Falls metropolitan area for this period of time. And the total number of degrees is listed, about 4,200 AA degrees and not quite 16,000 BA and higher degrees that were awarded. Those represent respectively about an 8.5% and about a 4% increase from the base year. And then we've computed the number of points by multiplying the number of degrees times the point figures for each type of degree. You can see that the weighted number of degrees increased, or the number of points increased by about 4.7%. Because we weight BA degrees higher than we weight BAA degrees. Population for the Buffalo metropolitan area actually decreased very slightly between these 2 years. So that has the effect of increasing the points per 100,000 population, which is the basis that we're reporting this on, slightly more than that 4.7%. So their points per 100,000 went up by about 4.8%. So that gives you a good picture of the steps that we go through in computing the increase in degree attainment for a metropolitan area. Behind that is the detail report. And the detail report is provided so you can see which institutions that we looked at to compute these totals. So this is that institution report for Buffalo. And you'll see that we've listed a couple of dozen institutions there, and you can see this is a very comprehensive list. This is everybody that's in that IPEDS database, regardless of whether they awarded an AA or BA degree or not. And the reason we included, for example, the Continental School of Beauty is just to show you that we didn't leave anybody out who was included in the IPEDS database, even though that institution and several of the others did not award AA or BA degrees. So we wanted to make sure that everybody knew that we had not overlooked an institution. So one of the first things we urge people to do is to make sure that the institutions that are in their metropolitan area are listed on this report. Occasionally, there are glitches in the IPEDS database, and addresses get changed so people don't get classified in the right metropolitan area. So this is something that we urge you to have a look at. And then obviously you want to look at particular institutions and see what's happening with those institutions. So just for ease of exposition, if we zoom in just a little bit, you'll see that the detailed report shows you the number of AA and BA and higher degrees for each institution for each year, and gives you an idea of how much change there is from year to year. One of the things that we'll be doing subsequently is preparing what we call an outlier report. So we'll go through and look institution by institution and look for institutions that had unusual increases in the number of degrees awarded year to year. And we're looking really for two reasons. One, if there's an institution that does an exceptional job at improving its output, boy, we really want to know about that. They may be doing something special that everybody should be looking at. And we want to know about the success story. The other thing is we know occasionally that there are changes in the way some kinds of degrees, particularly distance learning degrees, get reported. And sometimes there are administrative changes that produce big movements in the number of degrees that are attributed to particular institutions. And under the prize dividend rules, we'll be looking to adjust those totals to make sure that degrees are reported on a similar basis every year, and that it isn't just an administrative change that produces an increase in the number of degrees, but there's an actual change in the output of an educational institution. So what we'll be doing with these year 2 reports is asking every city to take a look at both their summary report, their detailed report, treat these results as preliminary, to validate the results for their area with their institution. And again, I think the primary thing to look at is for those unusual increases or decreases. So if you think somebody may have misreported, that you work with them to correct those reports, and there is a process for doing that on the IPEDS website. All of your institutions will have somebody in their institutional research offices who is very familiar with the IPEDS system and can make those corrections when they do occur. Occasionally it's wrong data. Occasionally it can be very technical, like having the wrong address somewhere or getting included in the wrong metropolitan area. And as I mentioned, sometimes administrative changes can influence where degrees get reported. And just for your reference, if you want to look at the raw data yourself, it's very easy to get it if you are willing to wade through a series of menus on the IPEDS website. And for your reference, we've just shown you where the data center is. And it's a pretty simple matter to log into that website, and you can drill down to your metropolitan area or particular institutions to see what data is on the IPEDS website. What you're seeing in the reports that we presented is an extract of IPEDS data that we took about 6 weeks ago. So it was current as of then, although those numbers can change from time to time. We will revise that, go back to the IPEDS database and pick up any changes when we finalize this. But if you want to satisfy your curiosity and look at what's in the IPEDS system, that's something you can do with a browser and a few minutes of your time and patience to wade through the menus to get particular institutions. So our next steps, as I mentioned, we'll be putting together this, what we're calling Year 2 outlier report to identify regions and particular institutions that have had big increases in the numbers of degrees awarded. We'll also be looking for ones that are big decreases, although that's somewhat rarer. We'll be, once we've given folks an opportunity to review their reports and identify any errors and correct them, we'll be publishing what we call a Year 2 performance report that will summarize where everybody is performing according to these Year 2 data. And again, I think that the thing we'll really be using this for is as a dress rehearsal for Year 3. And Year 3 is when we'll be essentially going through these same exact steps and then making a determination with the assistance of our panel of judges to make a call on which city, which metropolitan area have the biggest population adjustment increase in the number of 2-year and 4-year college degrees over that period of time. And just for your reference, we put in a little calendar here that shows you what's happening with iPads with Year 2. That data became available in October of this year. The timeline for the 2012-2013 data is October of next year. We may get a little bit earlier or get an advanced peek at it, but it doesn't become officially publicly available until the fall. And it'll probably be about this time next year that we'll have announced the winner of the prize dividend based on the data from the 2012-2013 academic year. So with that, I'll conclude the narrative part of the presentation and turn it back to Catherine to field any questions that folks might have.
Thank you so much, Joe, for going through that with us. The first question, I think it actually does relate to this last slide. We've been asked to remind the audience about the time frame for recording final IPED data sets, the additional assessments that occur by the committee, and the final determination of the prize. So I can help you with that too, but can you kind of go through the data and what that means in terms of the prize competition specifically?
Go through the iPads data? Yeah, essentially what we'll be doing is what you see with the Year 2 report, we'll do in Year 3. And we'll pull down the iPads data. We'll generate a set of Year 3 provisional reports. We'll send them out to each city and give you a chance to correct them. And then we'll sift through that data and identify any issues or anomalies in the data. I mean, our starting point is the iPads data, and we'll assume that it's correct. But as we provided for in the prize rules, one of the things that we look for are these instances in which maybe administrative or reporting changes have influenced how many degrees get attributed to an institution, and there may be other issues as well. If we identify anything like that in the iPads data, then we'll present that to our panel of judges. And in October, November of next year, we'll be in the process with that panel of judges to make a call on which city, which metropolitan area has had the biggest population-adjusted increase in the number of post-secondary degrees, based on the formula that I showed you in the presentation.
Great. And just to explicitly answer the question, in being that we will be releasing once we have all this third-year iPad data, which, as Joe mentioned, will come out around October 2014. There will be the deliberations with the judges, and the winner will be announced soon after that, maybe November or December, depending on the exact time of when the iPad data is released. But the talent dividend competition will be announced, the winner, late in 2014. All right, so some of the next questions. It has been mentioned that the talent dividend prize will be based on more than just an increased number of degrees. Could you clarify this and expand on what that means in more detail, if true?
Well, I don't think it's based on anything other than the increase in degrees. That's what the rules have specified from day one. So there aren't any other factors. Although the one thing I have to say, and I'll just stress this, is we know that sometimes that the data that are presented in IPED are influenced by administrative changes in where degrees get reported. And one of the things that we will do in that process with the panel of judges is look to see whether the increase is a result of a real change in the output of degrees in the institution, or just the change in an administrative way in which degrees were reported. And I can give you a specific example. We identified this even before we started the Talent Dividend Prize. Sometimes states and state systems will report distance learning degrees at a system-wide level at a single central campus, and sometimes they will distribute them out to individual campuses. And we're not expressing an opinion on which way is the right way to do that, but if you change from doing it one way in 1 year to another way in another year, we wouldn't want to treat that as an increase in the number of degrees awarded. So what we'd be looking for is however you're reporting, for example, again, distance learning degrees, that you do it on a consistent basis year to year, and that the increase is not solely the product of simply a way in which things were reported, as opposed to the actual numbers of degrees awarded.
Great. And additionally, at least from the CEOs for Cities point of view, as Joe mentioned, while the rankings and awarding the prize is, as he mentioned, really based on the increase in degrees, what was mentioned by, are there any other qualifying means that would determine the winner? I think that there's a judges panel being gathered specifically for extenuating circumstances. If a city has a very unique case, or if there was a change in the region or any of those things, that's when we ask the city to raise any of their suggestions or worries, and those will be taken into consideration for the judges to only in the they don't data is accurately reflecting the true progress in the city. But again, as Joe mentioned, the increase in the data is really what we're basing this competition off of as it was originally created. Another question for you, Joe, is has the 1% increase impact data changed for the individual cities?
Oh, have our estimates of the dollar amount of the talent dividend changed for individual cities? Yes, we have a new set of estimates for individual cities. Again, that basically corresponds to going from about $760 to $850 for each percentage point. So, and CEOs for cities have published that. I'm not sure that's on our website, but we do have a new report we call City Dividends that summarizes that. But I'm not sure if we can, if we haven't had that on our website, we can point people to it.
Okay, great. Let me look at, there's another list of some questions. One question is, I understand that the talent dividend is based on the number of degrees awarded. However, your initial discussion was about how people with higher education help the community be better off. There isn't necessarily proof that students who get degrees stay in the community. Can we speak to that?
Yeah, that's a terrific point. That was one of the things that we wrestled with in constructing the talent dividend prize. We know that particularly sort of 23, 24, 25-year-olds newly knitted with BA degrees are probably the most mobile people in our society, and that whether your community can hang on to the ones that it graduates and be competitive for that mobile group of people as they're choosing where to live has a lot to do with whether you realize the benefits of the talent dividend. But I think the thinking behind this competition was sort of twofold. One was, as a nation, we're better off if everybody gets competitive, not by trying to steal graduates from other people, but generating more. A rising tide will indeed lift all boats. And we also know that those locally produced graduates are the most likely to stay in their community. And then the other thing is, I think there was a view that that was the set of behaviors that we really wanted to incent, and that the funders wanted to incent was not just competing for talent, but generating more talent. But I think that folks were correct. The questioner is correct. You've got to not just create more talented folks. You've got to hang on to them. I don't think we're minimizing that as a parallel challenge for a lot of these communities. But the talent dividend prize is about that, sort of the first half of the equation, which is generating more degrees locally.
Great. And at this time, we don't seem to have any additional questions. I want to give just a few minutes. Oh, here we got another one. And just as a reminder for all the attendees, please feel free to enter any questions at the time. So another question that just came in, a point was made last year that the results are proprietary and not for release. Does this continue to be the case? Couldn't anyone conduct this analysis using publicly available data sets, one or more?
Yeah, all of the data that we use here is publicly available. I think we're just, here I'm speaking for Catherine and also for Noel, and so if I'm out of line, let me know. I think we are asking as a courtesy that among the participating cities that they not put too much weight on and not publicly distribute the 57 city rankings that we put out of the year one data. I think we wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. One was, year one doesn't decide the prize, and it's really the difference between the base year and year three that decides the prize. We don't want to make anybody think that they've got a lock on it, because they don't, nor discourage anybody who's participating. In fact, there's literally nothing that prevents anyone from going through exactly the exercise that we have gone through with this publicly available data at IPEDS and Census Bureau and making a similar computation. But I think we were just saying as a courtesy that we wanted to ask folks to refrain from spending a lot of time and energy pushing the horse race side of it.
All right, thank you. I think at this time that may be all the questions that we have. If there are any other questions, feel free to email myself at cbitar@ceosforcities.org, and we will do our best to answer the questions. Joe, thank you again for taking the time to explain the data and go through this presentation. And for everyone who attended, thank you so much for your time, and have a great weekend.